Start it. Or shut up and get out. Maya Whitmore hurled the microphone across the stage and it shattered against the polished concrete floor of that auction hall with a crack that made 200 millionaires flinch in their seats. She stabbed one finger at the dead, red dragster sitting forgotten in the corner. Silver blonde hair, swinging face twisted with a contempt that had silenced grown CEOs in boardrooms across 3 continents. "You wanted this heap of rust?" She laughed, loud, ugly, the sound bouncing off the glass walls. "Then start the engine, grease monkey. Start this $500 dragster right here in front of everyone, and I'll hand you the keys myself." Daniel Brooks didn't say a word. He set his old toolbox down on that marble floor. Slow, deliberate, and he knelt beside the machine that everybody swore was dead. 200 phones came up to film him fail. Then his hand slid behind the seat, and his fingers closed around something that had been hidden there for 40 years. Something that turned that billionaire's cruel smile to ash and left her whispering 2 words she never expected to say. "What did you find?" Do me a favor before we go any further. Drop the city you're watching from in the comments right now so I can see just how far this story travels tonight. And if you believe a man ought to be judged by what he knows, not what he owns, stick with me to the very end, because when Daniel reaches behind that seat, nothing in Maya Whitmore's empire is ever the same again. The heat in Houston that August morning was the kind that settles into a man's bones and stays there. Daniel Brooks wiped his hands on a red shop rag that hadn't been truly red in a long time and studied the flyer taped to the inside of his garage door. Whitmore Automotive presents the Legends Collection Luxury Auction, 1 day only. He'd found it folded up in the cab of a farm truck he'd been fixing for old man Pruitt out past the county line. Pruitt hadn't wanted it, said it was fancy people nonsense, cars going for more than most folks made in 10 years, and who needed that? But Daniel had kept it. Not because he had money. God knew he didn't have money. He had a mortgage 2 payments behind, a truck with a transmission he was babying along on prayers, and a 9-year-old daughter who needed new shoes for fall. What Daniel had was a single line at the bottom of that flyer, printed small like they were ashamed of it, also featuring assorted project vehicles and estate lots, starting bids from $500. $500. He could scrape together 500, barely, but he could. "Dad?" Daniel turned. Emily stood in the doorway of the shop, backpack on hair and the crooked ponytail she'd done herself because she was too proud lately to let him fix it. 9 years old and already convinced she could handle the whole world alone. She got that from her mother. "You're staring at that paper again," Emily said. "I'm thinking." "You always say that when you don't have an answer." Daniel laughed. It surprised him. He hadn't laughed much in a while. "You're going to be a lawyer someday, you know that. Or a detective, one of the 2. "I'm going to be a mechanic," Emily said, "like you." Something twisted in Daniel's chest when she said things like that. He didn't want her to be like him. He wanted her to be more. He wanted her to have the life he couldn't seem to build, no matter how many engines he tore apart and put back together, no matter how many nights he stayed in this shop until the cicadas went quiet. "Come here," he said. She came and he crouched down to her level, held up the flyer. "There's an auction today. Rich folks selling fancy cars, but down here," he pointed to the small print, "they've got old project cars, broken ones. And sometimes, a broken thing is only broken because nobody smart enough ever looked at it right. And you're smart enough. I don't know about smart, but I look close, and that's most of it." Emily studied the flyer with the seriousness she gave everything. "Are we going to buy a car?" "We're going to go look. That's free. Looking's always free." What Daniel didn't tell her was that he'd already made up his mind. There was a photograph on the back of that flyer buried in a collage of gleaming machines, and in the corner of it, half out of frame, sat a red dragster. Even in that terrible little image, even covered in dust and forgotten, something about the shape of it had reached out and grabbed Daniel by the throat. He couldn't have told you why. He'd been fixing machines for 20 years, and once in a great while a machine spoke to you, Not in words, in lines, in the honest curve of metal that a real craftsman had bent with his own two hands. That dragster was talking, and Daniel had learned a long time ago to listen. The Whitmore auction was held in a converted warehouse on the north side of the city, a cathedral of glass and steel that had cost more to renovate than Daniel's whole neighborhood was worth. He pulled his truck into the lot and immediately felt the eyes. Bentleys, a Rolls, two Ferraris parked like they were guarding something holy. And right in the middle of them, Daniel's 1998 pickup, rust blooming around the wheel wells, one headlight held in place with a zip tie. "Dad," Emily whispered, "everybody's looking at us." "Let them look," Daniel said, though his own stomach had gone tight. "We've got as much right to be here as any of these people. Money bought them a ticket. It didn't buy them the right to look down on us. Remember that." "I'll remember." He took her hand and they walked in. Inside was worse, or better depending on how you looked at it. The whole place glittered. Waiters carried trays of little glasses. Men in suits that cost more than a car laughed too loud at each other's jokes. Women in dresses stood in clusters, and everyone carried that particular smell of money. Expensive perfume, clean skin, not a single day of honest sweat. Daniel and Emily stood at the edge of all of it, a father and daughter who had never in their lives belonged anywhere less. "Excuse me." A young man in a headset appeared, looking Daniel up and down with a polite little sneer. "Are you here for the service entrance is around back. Deliveries go that way." Daniel didn't flinch. "I'm here for the auction, same as everybody." "Do you have a bidder's paddle, sir?" "Where do I get one?" The young man's eyes flicked to Emily, to Daniel's boots, to the zip-tied headlight visible through the glass doors. "Registration table. There's a deposit. Refundable, but it's $5,000 to bid on the main lots. I'm here for the estate lots, the $500 cars." Something shifted in the young man's face, amusement. "Oh, those." He handed over a laminated number card without another word, walked off, and Daniel heard him mutter something to another staffer. Heard both of them laugh. Emily heard it too. She looked up at her father, and there was a hurt in her eyes that had nothing to do with herself. "Don't," Daniel said quietly. "They're being mean to you. They're being small. There's a difference." He crouched down. A man who's got to make himself feel big by making somebody else feel small. That's the most broken kind of man there is. And I don't hate broken things. I fix them when I can. I pity them when I can't. But I never let them decide how I feel about myself. You understand? Emily nodded slowly. He could see her filing it away, the way she filed everything in that quick, hungry mind of hers. "Come on," he said. "Let's go find our car." They found it in the far corner, past the roped-off aisles where the real money was changing hands, in a section the auction house had clearly considered an embarrassment. A dozen forgotten machines sat under harsh fluorescent lights, a gutted muscle car, a pickup with no engine, a motorcycle that was more rust than metal, and the dragster. Daniel stopped 6 feet away and just looked at it. It was worse than the photograph. The red paint had faded to the color of old brick and dried blood. The tires were cracked so deep you could see the cords. A film of dust covered everything so thick the car looked like it had been sitting in a tomb. In a way it had. But Daniel wasn't looking at any of that. He was looking at the frame. He said softly. "Look at that." "Look at what? It's all dirty." "Look past the dirty. Look at the bones. See how the frame tapers there? See how somebody hand-formed that? You can't do that with a machine. Somebody stood over this thing with a torch and a hammer and their own two eyes. And they bent this metal by feel." He crouched down, knees popping. "Nobody builds like this anymore. Nobody's built like this in 40, 50 years. Emily crouched beside him, mimicking his posture exactly. "Is it worth more than $500? Daniel didn't answer right away, because the truth was, he was starting to feel that old feeling again, that thing that happened when a machine started whispering its secrets to him. and the whisper was getting louder. "I don't know yet," he said, "but it's not $500 worth of broken. Whatever this is, somebody spent a lot more than $500 making it." "Then why is it here?" That was the question. Daniel stood slowly, eyes traveling over the machine. For the first time, he noticed the little placard wired to the roll bar. Lot 47, race display vehicle, non-functional, provenance unknown, starting bid $500. Sold as is, provenance unknown. Daniel had spent enough years around old machines to know what those two words usually meant. They meant nobody had bothered to look. They meant somebody had glanced at a dusty old car, decided it wasn't worth their time, and shoved it in a corner with a price tag that said, "Make it go away." But somebody once had cared about this car enough to shape its frame by hand. Daniel Brooks. He turned. A man was walking toward them. Older, maybe 70, in a suit that fit him wrong, like he'd bought it for a funeral and never worn it since. He had kind eyes and a nervous mouth. "You are Daniel Brooks, from the shop off 290. "That's me. Do I know you?" "You fixed my grandson's car, the Camaro, 2 years ago, when 3 other shops said the block was cracked, and you found out it was just a pinhole in the head gasket." "I remember. How's the boy?" "In college now, first in the family." The old man's eyes went wet. "You did that for us for $200 when the dealership wanted $4,000. I never forgot it. I saw you come in and I thought—" He glanced around nervously and lowered his voice. "I work here. Part-time security." I shouldn't say anything. Daniel felt something prickle up the back of his neck. "Say what?" The old man looked at the dragster, then back at Daniel. "That car," he whispered. "2 of the engineers came to look at it, Whitmore's own people, high-up ones. They spent an hour on it real quiet, and then they went upstairs, and there was a lot of shouting behind closed doors. And the next morning, that car was moved down here, with the junk lots." He swallowed. "Mr. Brooks, they don't move things down here that they think are worth something. They move things down here they want gone. Quick, before questions get asked." "What kind of questions?" The old man shook his head. "I'm just a guard, but I know what I saw, and I know good work when I see it, because my father built cars, real cars, back when men still built things." He nodded at the dragster. "Whatever's wrong here, it ain't the car." And then, before Daniel could ask him anything else, a bell rang somewhere in the main hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, please make your way to the main floor. Your host is about to begin." The old man's face went tight. "I have to go. I've said too much." He started to leave, then stopped, gripped Daniel's arm with a strength that surprised him. "You're a good man. If you can get that car, get it. Don't let them make it disappear. Some things deserve to be remembered." And then he was gone, swallowed into the crowd, leaving Daniel standing beside a dead dragster, his heart pounding, his daughter looking up at him with wide, frightened, thrilled eyes. "Dad," Emily whispered. "What's happening?" Daniel looked down at her and he made a decision, right there, standing in the corner of a rich woman's warehouse. A decision that would change both their lives forever. "I think," he said slowly, "we're going to buy a car." The main floor of the auction was theater, pure and simple. They'd built an actual stage with lights, a screen behind it that flashed images of the machines up for sale. Rows of chairs faced it, filled with the beautiful and the wealthy. Daniel and Emily found 2 seats in the very back where they belonged in the mind of everyone in that room. And in the mind of nobody who mattered. Then the lights dimmed, a woman walked out onto the stage, and Daniel understood immediately that he was looking at Maya Whitmore. You could tell. Some people carry power the way you carry a wallet. It's just something they have. Maya Whitmore wore power like it was tailored to her body. She was maybe 50, silver blonde, sharp as broken glass. And she moved across that stage like she owned not just the building, but the air in it and everyone breathing that air. "Good afternoon," she said, and her voice filled the room without her seeming to try. For those who don't know me, and I genuinely can't imagine there are many, I'm Maya Whitmore, Whitmore Automotive. My grandfather started this company in a barn in Texas with a wrench and a bad attitude, and I've spent 30 years turning it into the third largest automotive group in North America. Polite applause. She waved it off like she was too important to accept it. Today isn't about business, today is about passion. Every machine you'll see is a piece of history, and history, she smiled. History goes to the highest bidder. The crowd laughed. She was good. Daniel would give her that. Very, very good at making rich people feel like they were part of something special. The auction began and the numbers were obscene. A '67 Shelby went for $400,000. A Ferrari that had raced at Le Mans crossed the $1 million mark, and Maya clapped her hands together in delight, and the whole room cheered like they'd all won something. Emily leaned over. "Dad, that's more money than we'll ever see, Em, I know." She went quiet. Daniel watched the numbers climb and felt the smallness of himself in that room. Felt it the way you feel cold from the inside out. What was he doing here? What did he think was going to happen? Some fairy tale where the poor mechanic finds treasure? And then a voice in his head, his own voice, but sounding an awful lot like the old security guard. "Whatever's wrong here, it ain't the car." He sat up straighter. The main lots ended. People got up, some headed for the exits the real business concluded, and then Maya Whitmore turned to the estate lots. "Now," she said, and her voice took on a different tone, a mocking, playful tone. "For those of you with more modest tastes, we have some genuine treasures." The screen flashed to the gutted muscle car. The crowd chuckled. "A collector's dream," Maya said, "if the collector has very low standards." Laughter. The room was in her hand. She went through them one at a time. Each one a little joke, a little performance. And the numbers were tiny, and the laughs were big. Daniel's face went hot, because he understood now that these weren't just old cars to these people. They were props. Something to laugh at. The way they'd laughed at his truck. The way they'd laughed at his boots. And then the screen flashed to the red Dragster. "Oh!" Maya put a hand to her chest like she'd seen something amusing. "Oh, now this one." The image on the screen was cruel. They'd lit it to look as pathetic as possible. All the dust and the cracks and the fading. "Lot 47. Maya read off her card and her lip curled. A race display vehicle, which is a very generous way of saying somebody's dead lawn ornament. The crowd howled. "Provenance unknown, which is a fancy way of saying nobody knows where this pile of rust came from, and nobody wants to admit they let it into the building." Daniel's hands closed into fists in his lap. "Starting bid is $500, Maya said, which in my professional opinion is $499 too high." She waited for the laugh. Got it. "Honestly, folks, I'll be shocked if this thing has a working part in it. I doubt it's turned over in decades. Do I hear 500? Silence. "Do I hear 500 for the world's most expensive paperweight?" Silence, and then more laughter because the silence itself had become the joke. And that was when something in Daniel Brooks came loose. Maybe it was the old guard's voice. Maybe it was the sneering young man at the door. "The deliveries are around back, sir." Maybe it was Emily sitting beside him, watching all these rich people laugh at a machine that some craftsman had shaped with his own hands. Watching them treat honest work like garbage. Or maybe it was just that Daniel Brooks had spent his whole life being the man in the back of the room, and he was tired of it. He stood up. 500. The room turned. 200 faces swiveled toward the back, toward the man in old clothes standing beside a little girl. There was a beat of pure silence, and then a ripple of something worse than laughter. Surprise. The surprise of people who genuinely couldn't understand why the help was talking. Maya Whitmore shaded her eyes against the stage lights and peered into the back of the room. "I'm sorry," she said. "Did somebody actually bid?" "I did." Daniel's voice was steady. He was surprised by how steady it was. $500 for the Dragster. Maya found him. Her eyes locked onto him, and Daniel watched her take him in. The clothes, the boots, the child, all of it. And he watched her decide in half a second exactly what he was and exactly how much he was worth. "And you are Daniel Brooks. What do you do, Mr. Brooks?" "I fix engines." "You fix engines." She said it slowly, tasting it, and the crowd started to laugh again, and Daniel understood he had just walked willingly onto her stage and handed her a gift. "Well, Mr. Brooks, I have to say that's fitting. It takes a mechanic to love a machine nobody else could love." Big laugh. "Do I hear 501? No, going once?" "You said it doesn't run," Daniel said. Maya stopped. The room stopped. "I'm sorry. You said it doesn't run. You said you'd be shocked if it turned over. That's what you said." Something flickered in Maya's eyes, a wariness. She hadn't expected the mechanic to have a voice, and now that he did, she didn't like it. "I said what everyone in this room can see with their own eyes. That vehicle is dead, Mr. Brooks. It's been dead a long time." "How do you know, excuse me, how do you know it's dead?" Daniel took a step forward into the aisle. "Did your people try to start it? Did anybody? Or did you just look at the dust and decide?" The room had gone very quiet. Because there was something in Daniel's voice, not anger exactly, something more like certainty. And certainty in a room full of people who had been laughing was a strange and uncomfortable thing. Maya recovered fast. She'd been in 1,000 negotiations. She wasn't going to be knocked off her stride by a man in work boots. "Mr. Brooks," she said, and her voice turned warm and terrible. The voice of someone about to be very publicly kind in the cruelest way possible. "Do you know what I love about people like you? You have hope. You look at garbage and you see gold. It's beautiful, really. It's why you'll always fix engines in a garage and I'll always own the company." A murmur of appreciation from the crowd. "So let me make you an offer," she said, "in the spirit of that hope." She smiled, the smile of a cat that had cornered something small. "You think that dragster is worth saving? You think it'll run? Then here's my challenge, Mr. Brooks." She spread her arms wide, addressing the whole room. "Right here, right now, in front of everybody, start that dragster. Get it running under its own power. Get that engine to turn over, and it's yours, free. Not $500, free." She let that land. "But if you can't, if you stand there and fiddle with it and embarrass yourself and it stays as dead as it's been for 40 years, then you take your little girl, you take your truck, and you go home. And you learn that some of us know the difference between treasure and trash." She paused. "Do we have a deal?" The room erupted. They loved it. They loved her. This was better than the Ferrari, better than the Shelby. This was Bloodsport, and the man in the work boots was the one who was about to bleed. Daniel felt Emily's hand find his. She'd come up beside him without his noticing. Her small fingers wrapped around two of his, and she looked up at him. She wasn't scared anymore. She was furious. 9 years old and furious on her father's behalf. And something about that steadied Daniel more than anything else could have. "Dad," she whispered, "you don't have to. We can just go." Daniel looked down at his daughter, then up at the stage, at the woman standing there with her arms spread and her sharp smile. So certain. So completely certain she had already won. Whatever's wrong here, it ain't the car. "Ma'am," Daniel said, and his voice carried clear across that whole room, "I'm going to need my toolbox." The laughter died down just a little. "I left it at the door," Daniel went on. "Your man there wouldn't let me carry it in, said it looked like I was there to make a delivery." He let that sit. "So somebody's going to have to go get it, because I don't do anything with my hands that I can't do with my tools. And I don't make a promise I don't keep." Maya's smile thinned just a fraction. "Get the man his toolbox," she said. It took 4 minutes for the young man in the headset to retrieve it, and those 4 minutes were the longest of Daniel's life. The crowd didn't sit back down. They gathered. They pressed in around the far corner where the dragster sat. Phones already out, already filming, because whatever happened next was going to be worth watching. Daniel stood beside the dead machine with his daughter and 200 strangers waiting for him to fail. "Dad," Emily said quietly so only he could hear, "can you really start it?" And here was the thing Daniel would never tell her, not then. He didn't know. He truly didn't know. He'd looked at the frame, the welds, the craftsmanship. He'd felt the machine whisper. But feeling a machine's history and getting a 40-year dead engine to turn over were two very different things. There could be 100 reasons it wouldn't start. Seized pistons, rotted lines, a cracked block, a dead everything. He was standing in front of 200 people who wanted to see him humiliated, and he'd bet his dignity and his daughter's pride on a machine he'd known for less than an hour. But when he looked down at Emily's face, he didn't say any of that. "I'm going to try like hell," he said. "And whatever happens, I want you to remember something, Em. The trying is the part they can't laugh at. A man who tries and fails is still 10 times the man who never tried at all. You hear me?" "I hear you." "Good." The toolbox arrived, set down at Daniel's feet with a contemptuous little push from the headset man. Daniel looked at it, then at the crowd, then at Maya Whitmore, who had come down off her stage now to watch this up close, to be there for the kill. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "the clock's ticking. I've got a very expensive room full of people who'd like to be entertained. Any day now." Daniel didn't answer her. He knelt down beside his toolbox and he opened it. And the sound of those latches clicking open was the only sound in the whole vast warehouse. Inside was 30 years of a man's life. Wrenches worn smooth from 1,000 jobs, a socket set his father had given him, a flashlight, a set of feeler gauges, a rag. Nothing fancy, nothing that cost more than $100, just the honest tools of an honest trade. Daniel put his hands on that dead dragster the way a doctor puts his hands on a patient. Gentle, listening, feeling for a pulse that everyone else swore wasn't there. He didn't start with the engine. That surprised the crowd. They'd expected him to leap at the ignition, to turn a key and pray. Instead, Daniel worked slow. He checked the fuel lines, running them through his fingers, feeling for cracks. He checked the wiring, tracing it with his eyes. He pulled a plug, looked at it, put it back. He moved around that machine like he had all the time in the world, and the crowd's laughter faded into a puzzled, watchful silence. Because a man who moved like that didn't look like a man about to fail. "He's stalling," someone said. "He doesn't know what he's doing," said another. But Maya Whitmore had gone quiet. Because Maya, whatever else she was, had grown up in a garage full of grease and steel. And she knew, deep in the part of herself she'd buried under 30 years of boardrooms, what it looked like when a man truly knew machines. And Daniel Brooks looked exactly like that. Daniel worked his way around to the driver's compartment, leaned in, checking the controls, the linkages, and that was when his hand brushed against something behind the seat. He almost missed it. It was tucked back in a shadow up under the frame rail, in a spot no casual inspection would ever find. His fingers found a shape that didn't belong. A small metal housing. Machined, deliberate. Hidden. Daniel went still. He'd been reaching back there to check a fuel line, but his hand had found something else entirely, and every instinct he had, 30 years of instinct, told him this was important. This was the thing. This was what the two engineers had found. This was why the car had been shoved into a corner with a $500 price tag and provenance unknown. He wiped away a layer of dust with his thumb. There was engraving on the little housing. Numbers, letters, a serial code of some kind. And beneath it, so small he had to lean in close to read it, 2 words that made the breath catch in Daniel's throat. He didn't say anything. Not yet. His mind was racing. Connecting the frame, the welds, the craftsmanship, the hidden mechanism, all of it assembling into a shape he could barely believe. "Mr. Brooks." Maya's voice had lost some of its edge. She'd been watching his face. "What are you doing back there?" Daniel slowly withdrew his hand from behind the seat. He stood up, turned around. And 200 people saw that the man in the work boots was not smiling like a man who'd found treasure. He was pale, shaken, looking at the dragster like it had spoken to him in a dead man's voice. Mr. Brooks. Maya said his name again, and now there was something almost like nervousness in it. I asked you a question. Daniel looked at her, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of that silent room. You said this was worth $500, he said. You said it was trash. You said you'd be shocked if it ran. He paused. I'm going to tell you the same thing that guard told me. His eyes didn't leave her face. Whatever's wrong here, ma'am, it ain't the car. Maya Whitmore's smile was gone now, completely gone. What did you find? She said, and Daniel Brooks looked down at his daughter, then back up at the billionaire who'd tried to break him in front of a room full of strangers. And he reached one more time behind that seat. His fingers closed around the hidden mechanism. He felt the weight of 40 years of a secret pressing against his palm. A reason, he said, that this car was never just worth $500. The room did not laugh. Not one single person in that entire warehouse laughed, because they had all just watched a man they'd been mocking for 10 minutes go pale as a ghost over a machine they'd been told was worthless. And some animal part of every one of them understood all at once that they had been wrong. About the car, about the man, about everything. Maya Whitmore took one step toward Daniel Brooks, the most powerful person in that room. And she took the step like she wasn't sure her legs would hold her. Show me, she said. Show me, Maya said again, and this time it wasn't a command, it was closer to a plea. Daniel didn't move right away. He crouched there beside the dragster, hand still resting behind the seat, feeling the cool, machined edge of what his fingers had found. And he let the silence stretch. Not because he was being cruel, because he needed the moment. He needed to be sure of what he was about to say before he said it in front of 200 people who had spent the last 10 minutes laughing at him. I'll show you, he said finally. But I want everybody in this room to hear something first. He stood up slow, knees popping, wiped his hands on that faded rag, looked around at the crowd, at all those faces that weren't laughing anymore. 10 minutes ago, this woman told you this car was trash, Daniel said. She told you it never ran. She told you nobody knew where it came from. Provenance unknown. That's what the little card says right there. He pointed at the placard wired to the roll bar. I want every one of you to remember that, because in about 2 minutes you're going to find out that everything you were just told was a lie. A murmur went through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Mr. Brooks? Maya's voice had gone sharp again, but underneath the sharpness there was fear now, and Daniel could hear it plain as a knock on a bad engine. I don't know what game you think you're playing. No game. Daniel reached behind the seat one more time, and this time he worked the hidden mechanism free of its housing. Gently, the way you'd lift a bird's egg out of a nest. It came loose with a soft metallic click that somehow carried across that whole silent warehouse. This is a hand-fabricated auxiliary throttle linkage, Daniel said. Somebody machined it custom, bolted it in behind the driver's seat out of sight, where nobody would ever find it unless they knew to look. He held it up so the light caught it. You don't hide a part like this on a display car. You don't hide it on trash. You hide it because it means something. He turned it over in his fingers. And there were the 2 words he'd read in the dust. He read them out loud now, and his voice cracked just slightly on the second one. There's an engraving, he said. It says, Falcon Hayes. Emily, standing beside him, saw her father's face change when he said that name. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew her dad, and she knew that look. It was the look he got when something that had been broken, his whole understanding of something, suddenly clicked into place. A voice came from the crowd, an older man, gray-haired in an expensive suit, pushing his way toward the front. Did you say Falcon? Daniel looked at him. Midnight Falcon. That's what this is. You know it. The gray-haired man had gone white. Everybody who ever cared about drag racing knows it. The Midnight Falcon was a legend. Set records nobody thought a car could set back in the 60s. And then it burned. There was a fire in the shop. The car was destroyed. Everybody knows it was destroyed. His voice dropped. It's a ghost story, son. You're telling me you've got the ghost sitting right here. The room exploded, people shouting over each other, phones lifting higher. The whole careful theater of Maya Whitmore's auction collapsing into chaos. Quiet! Maya grabbed a spare microphone from the stage. Everybody quiet! The room settled, uneasy. Maya came down off the last step of the stage and walked toward the dragster. Her heels clicked against the concrete in the silence. She stopped a few feet from Daniel. Up close, without the stage lights and the crowd to play to, she looked older, more tired. And when she looked at the part in Daniel's hand, Daniel saw something flicker across her face he hadn't expected. Recognition. You know what this is, Daniel said, quietly, just to her. Don't you? I don't know anything, Maya said, but she'd hesitated. And Daniel had spent 30 years learning to hear the difference between an engine running clean and an engine hiding a knock. He heard the knock in her voice, loud and clear. Your engineers found this, Daniel said. 2 of them, yesterday or the day before. They spent an hour on this car. And then there was shouting in an office upstairs, and the next morning this thing got shoved down into the junk lots with a price tag that said, "Make it disappear." He watched her face. Who told you about the guard? Nobody. I'm just telling you what I know. And what I know is that you found out what this car was, and instead of telling the world you'd found a lost legend, you tried to bury it. The only question I've got is why? Maya's jaw tightened. You're a mechanic. You fix trucks. You don't know anything about my company. You're right, Daniel said. I don't. But I know this. He set the linkage down on the seat carefully. You offered me a challenge in front of all these people. You said, start the engine and the car's mine, free. You want to take that back now? The trap of it closed around her, and everyone in the room felt it close. Because she couldn't take it back. She'd set it into a microphone with 200 witnesses and 100 cameras rolling. If she walked it back now, she'd be admitting she'd lied about the car. She'd be admitting the whole performance was a fraud. Start it, Maya said. Her voice was ice. If you can. And we'll talk about what happens after. No, Daniel shook his head. We won't talk about anything after. You said the words, start the engine. It's mine, free and clear. I've got 200 witnesses. So say it again. Right now. Or admit to everybody in this room that you knew exactly what this car was the whole time. For a long moment, Maya Whitmore and Daniel Brooks stared at each other, and the whole warehouse held its breath. Fine, she said at last, biting off the word. Start the engine and the car is yours. Free. You have my word in front of everyone. Her eyes narrowed. But it won't start. It hasn't run in 40 years. You're a fool if you think it will. Maybe, Daniel said. Let's find out. He turned back to the machine. And here was the thing nobody in that room understood. The thing that made Daniel's hands go cold even as he reached for his tools. He still didn't know if it would start. Finding the linkage, reading the name, understanding what the car was, none of that meant the engine would turn over. A legend could be just as dead as a piece of junk. 40 years was 40 years. Seals rotted, metal seized, fuel turned to varnish. He knelt down. Emily knelt beside him, and she put her small hand on his shoulder, leaned in close, whispered so only he could hear. Dad, what if it doesn't start? Daniel looked at her and he told her the truth this time. Because she'd earned it. Then we walk out of here with our heads up, he said, and we let every one of these people wonder for the rest of their lives what we found. Because I already know what this car is, Em. Whether the engine turns or not doesn't change that. The truth doesn't need an engine to be true. Then he smiled, just a little, and there was something in it she hadn't seen in a long time. That said, he murmured, I have never in my life met an engine I couldn't wake up, and I don't intend to start today. He opened his toolbox. The next 20 minutes were the strangest 20 minutes in that auction house's history. 200 of the richest people in Texas, people who paid other people to do everything for them, stood in a rough circle and watched a working man work. Daniel didn't rush. That was the first thing they noticed. A desperate man would have rushed. Daniel moved like he had all day. He pulled the fuel line and it came away gummed and black, and he cleaned it. He drained what was left in the tank, a foul, dark sludge, and someone in the crowd gagged at the smell, and Daniel didn't even look up. He checked the plugs one by one, wire brushed the corrosion off the contacts, gapped them by feel with a gauge worn smooth from 30 years of thumbs. "Somebody get me a gallon of fresh gas," he said, not looking up. "There's a can in the bed of my truck. Blue can. Your man out there knows which truck. It's the ugly one." A ripple of nervous laughter. But somebody went. While they waited, Daniel worked on the ignition. He traced every wire, found a corroded ground and scraped it clean, found a cracked distributor cap, and, miracle of miracles, found that the crack hadn't gone all the way through. He worked with a patience that was almost unbearable to watch, and the longer he worked, the quieter the room got. And the more people began to believe, against all reason, that this might actually happen. Maya Whitmore watched every move. Daniel, glancing up once, caught the expression on her face, and it wasn't contempt anymore, it was something much more complicated. The face of a woman watching her own past walk toward her out of a corner she thought she'd sealed off forever. The gas came. Daniel poured it in himself, slow, careful, and he primed the lines by hand, working the fuel up through the system with a patience that bordered on prayer. "Emily," he said, "come here." She came. "I want you to sit up in that seat," he said. "When I tell you you're going to turn this key, just turn it, that's all. Your old dad's hands are going to be busy." Emily's eyes went wide. "Me?" "You." He smiled at her. "This is your car too, kid. It's been our project since we walked in the door. Might as well be your hands that bring it back to life." There was something in the crowd then, a softening, an ache, because even the coldest of them had once been a child. And even the coldest of them understood what it meant for a father to hand his daughter a moment like that. Emily climbed up into the driver's seat of the Midnight Falcon. Her feet didn't reach the pedals. She put her small hand on the key. Daniel positioned himself over the engine, one hand on the throttle linkage, the other holding a wire he'd have to touch to a contact at exactly the right instant. He took a breath. "Now, Em." Emily turned the key. The engine coughed. It was a horrible sound. A wet, choking, grinding cough. The sound of a machine that had been dead a very long time, being asked to remember how to live. The crowd flinched as one. Someone let out a nervous laugh. "Nothing." "It's dead," someone said. "I told you it was dead." Daniel didn't answer. He adjusted the linkage, touched the wire to a different contact, wiped his forehead with the back of his wrist. "Again, Em." Emily turned the key. The engine coughed again, longer this time, a ragged, desperate hacking. And then it caught, for half a second. A single, glorious half-second of a real firing sound. Before it died again. The crowd gasped. "It almost," someone started. "Almost," Daniel muttered. "Come on, old girl. I know you're in there." He was talking to the engine now. Low, the way a man talks to a frightened animal. 40 years is a long nap. Time to wake up. Time to show them what you were. He made one more adjustment. His hands were steady. His whole life had been leading to hands this steady over an engine this important. "Emily," he said, "one more time. And when it catches, and it is going to catch, you don't let go of that key till I say. You understand me?" "I understand, Dad." "That's my girl." He set his jaw. "Now." Emily turned the key. And the Midnight Falcon roared. It didn't cough this time. It didn't sputter. It caught with a sound like thunder rolling up out of 40 years of silence. A deep-throated, impossible roar that filled the entire warehouse and rattled the glass in the high windows and vibrated up through the concrete floor into the feet of every single person standing there. The engine that hadn't turned over since before most of them were born came screaming back to life like it had never died at all. Like it had just been waiting all those years in that dusty corner for the right pair of hands to find it. The crowd went absolutely wild. They screamed, they cheered, they grabbed each other. 200 millionaires who 10 minutes ago had been laughing at a man in work boots were now screaming and clapping and filming as that legendary engine howled. And Emily Brooks sat in the driver's seat of a resurrected ghost hands, white-knuckled on the wheel, tears streaming down her face, and the biggest smile anybody had ever seen. Daniel stood up. He looked at his daughter. His own eyes were wet. He raised one hand and drew it across his throat. Emily understood. She turned the key back. The great engine wound down to silence. Its work done, its point made, its resurrection complete. And into that ringing silence, Daniel Brooks turned around and looked at Maya Whitmore. "It runs," he said simply. Maya Whitmore was not screaming. She was not cheering. She stood at the edge of the circle, pale as a sheet. One hand pressed flat against her own chest, staring at the dragster like she'd seen a ghost. Because she had. "That's not possible," she whispered. "It's not just possible," Daniel said. "It's done. You heard it. Everybody heard it. Now say it in front of all these people the way you promised." Maya's mouth opened, closed. She looked around at the crowd, at all the cameras, at the trap she'd walked herself into. "The car," she said, and her voice was hollow, "is yours." The crowd roared again, but Daniel raised his hand, and somehow the authority in it quieted them. He wasn't finished. "I'm not done," he said. He turned to face the whole room. "You all just watched something, but I don't think you understand what you watched, so let me tell you." He gestured at the dragster. "This is the Midnight Falcon, lost for 40 years, believed destroyed in a fire. And it wasn't in some museum, it wasn't in some collector's vault, it was in her company's warehouse, priced at $500, labeled trash, with a sign on it that said nobody knew where it came from." He let that sink in. Now maybe that's an honest mistake. Maybe nobody at Whitmore Automotive ever bothered to look close at an old car in the corner. It happens. But her own engineers looked at it 2 days ago. And instead of announcing to the world that they'd found a national treasure, somebody made a decision to bury it, to sell it cheap and fast and quiet. He paused. "And I want to know why. And I think all of you should want to know why too." The room went dead silent, but it was a different silence now. The silence of 200 people realizing they had witnessed the opening of something much bigger than a bet about a car. Maya Whitmore found her voice, low, dangerous. "You got your car, Mr. Brooks. You won. Take it and go. Don't push your luck." "I'm not pushing anything," Daniel said. "I'm asking a question, and the fact that you don't want me to ask it tells me it's the right question. You have no idea what you're talking about. Then help me understand." Daniel took a step toward her, and his voice softened. "That linkage behind the seat? It says Hayes on it. Somebody named Hayes built that part with his own hands. Custom, careful. That's a craftsman's name. That's a man who poured himself into this machine. And whoever he was, whatever happened to him, he deserves better than to have his life's work called trash and sold for $500 to make it disappear." He paused. "Now, who is he who's Hayes?" And that was the moment everyone in the room saw Maya Whitmore's mask crack. It was small, it was quick, but it happened. Something moved behind her eyes at the name, something old and painful. Daniel saw it, and he knew that this went deeper than a business decision, deeper than a mislabeled car. This was personal. "I don't know any Hayes," she said. It was a lie. Everyone could hear it was a lie. She said it too fast and too flat, and her eyes went somewhere else when she said it. "I think you do," Daniel said quietly. "This conversation is over." Maya turned to the crowd and put the professional smile back on, the smile that had made her $1 billion. But it didn't fit right anymore. It sat crooked on her face like a picture hung wrong. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming. What a show. Refreshments are still available in the East Hall. Drive safe. She was dismissing them, trying to close the door on the whole thing, heard everyone out before more questions could be asked. But it was too late. The gray-haired man who'd recognized the Falcon's name had been on his phone while Daniel worked. Now he lowered it and spoke loud enough for the whole room to hear. "I just called a friend of mine," he said. "He's a racing historian, wrote the book on the golden age of drag racing, literally the actual book. And I described what's sitting here to him and the name on that part." He looked at Maya. "And he told me something very interesting, Ms. Whitmore." He told them about the Midnight Falcon's two builders, the driver whose name everybody remembered, and the mechanic whose name almost nobody remembered. A young engineer who designed half the car by hand and never got a lick of credit for it, named Walter Hayes. "And here's the interesting part," the man said. "My friend says Walter Hayes went on to spend a few years working for a small automotive company in the 60s, before it got big, before it got bought and built and turned into an empire. He let it hang. The company was founded by a man named Whitmore, your grandfather, I believe." The room made a sound like all the air had been sucked out of it. Maya Whitmore stood very, very still. Daniel looked at her, and all the pieces were falling into place in his mind. The whole ugly shape of it. And he felt something he hadn't expected to feel toward this woman who had humiliated him. He felt pity. "That's it," he said softly. "Isn't it? Walter Hayes built this car. And then he went to work for your grandfather. And somewhere along the way, something happened. Something your family didn't want the world to know. And when your engineers found this car 2 days ago and figured out what it was, you realized that if it went public, if people started asking about Walter Hayes, they might start asking about things your family buried a long time ago." He shook his head slowly. "So you tried to make it disappear. $500, provenance unknown. Gone." "You don't know anything about my family," Maya said, but her voice was shaking now. "You're right, I don't, but I know this car. And I know that whatever your family did or didn't do, this machine and the man who built it deserve the truth." He put his hand on the dragster's warm hood. "And now it's mine, free and clear. You said so. 200 witnesses. And I promise you, Ms. Whitmore, I'm going to find out exactly what happened to Walter Hayes." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Maya Whitmore did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She laughed. But it wasn't the cruel laugh from before. It was small and broken, and it caught in her throat like a sob. "You have no idea," she said quietly, "what you've just started." And she turned and walked out of her own auction house, her heels clicking against the concrete, her staff scrambling after her. She left Daniel Brooks standing beside a resurrected legend, his daughter's hand in his, 200 witnesses, and a name he'd never heard before that morning burning in his mind like a coal. Walter Hayes. The drive home that night was quiet for a long time. Emily sat in the passenger seat of the ugly truck, and behind them, on a borrowed flatbed trailer that the gray-haired man had insisted on lending them, the Midnight Falcon rode home to a mechanic's garage outside Houston. "Dad," Emily said finally. "Yeah, baby. Are we in trouble?" Daniel thought about that for a long moment. He thought about the look on Maya Whitmore's face when she said, "You have no idea what you've just started." He thought about the fear underneath her anger. Fear like that didn't come from nowhere. Fear like that came from something big and buried and dangerous. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe." He glanced at her. "But listen to me, Em. Sometimes doing the right thing gets you in trouble, and when that happens, you've got a choice. You can do the wrong thing and stay safe, or you can do the right thing and take what comes. And I've tried real hard my whole life to be the kind of man who takes what comes." Emily nodded slowly. "That man," she said. "Walter Hayes, the one who built the car. What about him? Do you think he's still alive?" Daniel hadn't let himself think about it directly, But now that she'd said it out loud, the question filled the whole cab of the truck. "I don't know," he said. "The car's 60 years old. If he was a young man when he built it, he'd be old now. Real old." He gripped the wheel. "But if he is alive, Em, if there's any chance he's still out there, then I owe him something. Because I heard his engine run tonight. I felt his work come back to life under my hands. And a man who could build something like that—" Daniel's voice thickened. "A man like that deserves to know his work wasn't lost. That somebody found it, that somebody cared." They drove the rest of the way in silence, the great dead and resurrected machine riding behind them through the Texas dark. And neither of them knew that 3 counties away, in a small room in an assisted living facility, an 84-year-old man was lying awake, unable to sleep, haunted by a car he'd built with his own 2 hands 60 years before. A car he believed had burned to ash. A car whose engine he still heard in his dreams. His name was Walter Hayes, and in 2 days' time he was going to see a video that somebody had posted online. A shaky phone video filmed in a Texas auction house of a red dragster roaring back to life under the hands of a mechanic he'd never met. And the old man was going to sit up in his bed and put his trembling fingers to the screen. And he was going to weep. But that was still 2 days away. For now there was only the highway and the truck and the father and daughter and the ghost riding home behind them through the dark. Daniel Brooks did not yet know Walter Hayes was alive. Maya Whitmore did. And that, more than anything, more than the car, more than the challenge, more than the whole strange, impossible day, was the thing that was going to blow her family's darkest secret wide open. The video hit the internet at 6:14 the next morning, and by noon it had 4 million views. Daniel found out about it the way most people find out their life has changed overnight. All at once and with no warning. He was under a farm truck at his shop, elbow deep in a differential, when his phone started buzzing on the workbench and wouldn't stop. He ignored it. It buzzed again, and when it had buzzed 11 times in 2 minutes, he slid out from under the truck, wiped his hands, and picked it up. 63 missed calls. "Dad." Emily was standing in the doorway of the shop, holding her tablet. Her face was pale. "Dad, you need to see this. You're famous." "I'm what?" She turned the tablet around. There he was, frozen on the screen, kneeling over the Midnight Falcon. And the little counter under the video read 4,112,000 views. And it was ticking up while he watched it, faster than he could follow. The headline somebody had slapped on it read, "Mechanic humiliates billionaire CEO, resurrects lost legend she called trash." Daniel set the phone down slowly. 4 million people watched us, Emily said. Her voice was somewhere between terror and awe. 4 million people watched an engine start, Daniel corrected. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. 4 million people hadn't watched an engine start. They'd watched a working man stand up to a rich woman who thought she could laugh at anybody she pleased. And they'd watched him win. And there were an awful lot of working people in this country who were starving to see exactly that. The phone buzzed again. He looked at it, a number he didn't recognize. "Should I answer it?" Emily asked. "No." Daniel picked it up anyway and shut it off. "Not till I've had time to think. Right now I need to think." But thinking, it turned out, was a luxury he was not going to be allowed. Because at 12:40 that afternoon, a black car pulled into the gravel lot of his shop. A car worth more than the shop and the land it sat on combined. And out of it stepped a man in a suit carrying a leather briefcase. And Daniel knew before the man opened his mouth exactly who had sent him. "Mr. Brooks," the man said, "my name is Gerald Pope. I represent Whitmore Automotive." He smiled the practiced smile of a man who smiled for a living. "I wonder if we might have a few minutes of your time." Daniel wiped his hands. "You can have a few minutes, but my daughter stays. Whatever you've got to say, you can say in front of her." The man's smile flickered, just barely. "Of course, family, I understand." He glanced around, taking in the concrete floor, the old tools, the single bay, the whole modest life of it. And Daniel watched him do the math. watched him decide exactly how much this man and this life were worth. "Mr. Brooks, I'll come right to the point. Yesterday's events were unfortunate for everyone. Ms. Whitmore acted impulsively. She said things she regrets, and she'd like to make it right." "The car's already mine," Daniel said. "She made that right in front of 200 people." "Yes, about the car." Gerald Pope set his briefcase on the workbench and opened it. "Ms. Whitmore is prepared to purchase the vehicle back from you for a very generous sum." He slid a piece of paper across the bench. "That's our opening offer." Daniel looked at the number on the paper. It had a lot of zeros. Emily, standing beside him, looked at it too, and Daniel heard her breath catch. Because that number was more money than she had ever seen written down. More money than their whole street would make in a decade. Enough money to erase every problem Daniel Brooks had ever lost sleep over. The mortgage, the truck, Emily's future, college, all of it. Gone in the space of a signature. For one long moment, Daniel let himself feel the pull of it. Because he was a father. And a father who says money doesn't tempt him is either lying or a fool. And Daniel Brooks was neither. He looked at that number. He thought about his daughter's shoes and the 2 missed mortgage payments and the college fund he'd never been able to start. The pull was real. It was so real it was almost physical, like a current in deep water. And then he looked at the man's face, and he saw how badly Gerald Pope wanted him to sign. And he understood that a man doesn't get sent with a number that big unless the people who sent him are very, very afraid of something. "Why?" Daniel said. Gerald Pope blinked. "I'm sorry. Why does she want it back this bad? Yesterday it was trash. Yesterday it was $500 and provenance unknown. Today she's sending you out here with a number like that." Daniel pushed the paper back across the bench. "That's not a woman who made a mistake and wants to fix it. That's a woman who's scared. So I'll ask you the same thing I asked her. What happened to Walter Hayes?" The lawyer's face closed like a door. "I'm not authorized to discuss." "Then we don't have anything to talk about." Daniel folded his arms. "The car's not for sale. Not for that. Not for 10 times that. You can tell her I said so." Gerald Pope studied him for a long moment. The practiced smile was completely gone now, and what was left underneath it was something colder. "Mr. Brooks," he said quietly, "I'm going to give you some advice, and I'm going to give it to you for free because you seem like a decent man and you have a daughter to think about." He closed the briefcase. "Take the money. Whatever you think you've stumbled onto, whatever story you think you're going to tell, you're a small man going up against very large people. People with resources you can't imagine. People who did not build a multi-billion-dollar company by losing." He picked up the briefcase. "That car will bring you nothing but grief. Take the money and let all of this stay where it's been for 40 years, buried." And there it was, the threat dressed up in the clothes of concern. Daniel didn't flinch. "You just told me everything I needed to know," he said. "A man who says there's a story you shouldn't tell is a man admitting there's a story. Thank you for that." He nodded toward the door. "You can go now." Gerald Pope left. The black car pulled out of the gravel lot. And Daniel Brooks stood in his shop with his daughter and the resurrected legend, and the certain knowledge that he had just made himself an enemy of one of the most powerful families in America. "Dad." Emily's voice was very small. "That was a lot of money." It was. We could have paid for everything." Daniel crouched down in front of her. "Em, look at me. I need you to understand something, and it's a hard thing, and I'm sorry to put it on you so young." He took her hands. "There are things worth more than money. Not many, but some. And the truth is one of them. That man came here to buy my silence. He came here to make me help them hide something. And there's not enough money in the whole world to make me teach my daughter that her father can be bought." He squeezed her hands. "The money was real. But so are we. And I'd rather be poor and be able to look you in the eye than be rich and have to look away. You understand?" Emily was quiet for a long time. Then she nodded. There were tears in her eyes, but they were proud tears, and she threw her arms around her father's neck and held on. "Okay, Dad," she whispered. "Okay." And that would have been the end of it. A brave choice, a hard road, a closed chapter. Except that 2 hours later, Daniel's phone rang one more time. A number he didn't know. He almost didn't answer. He answered. "Is this Daniel Brooks?" The voice was old, frail. A man's voice thin and shaking, but with something underneath it, some old strength that hadn't quite worn away. "It is. Who's this?" There was a pause on the line, a long, ragged breath. "My name is Walter Hayes," the old man said. "You brought my car back to life." Daniel Brooks sat down. He had to. His legs just stopped working. And he found himself sitting on an overturned bucket in the middle of his own shop, phone pressed to his ear. And across the room, Emily saw his face change and went completely still. "Mr. Hayes," Daniel said, and his voice broke on the name. You're alive." "Last I checked," a dry, wheezing laugh. 84 years old and too stubborn to quit. My granddaughter showed me the video this morning. She thought I'd want to see it." Another ragged breath. "Mr. Brooks, I have not slept. I built that car 60 years ago. I built it with my own hands, and I have spent 60 years believing it burned to nothing in a fire. And this morning I watched a man I've never met bring it back from the dead." His voice cracked and gave out entirely. "I understand," Daniel said softly. "I understand, Mr. Hayes. I need to see it." The old man had found his voice again, and there was urgency in it now, a desperate old man's urgency, the urgency of someone who knows he doesn't have much time left. "Before I die, I need to see it with my own eyes. I need to touch it. Will you? Is that possible? Can an old man come and see the car he built?" Daniel looked across the room at the Midnight Falcon sitting in the bay of his shop. Then he looked at Emily. And Emily was already nodding, already understanding, already crying. "Mr. Hayes," Daniel said, "you don't need to come to me. Tell me where you are, and I will bring your car home to you." The silence on the other end of the line was the silence of a man who could not speak because he was weeping. They loaded the Falcon onto the trailer that same evening. Daniel didn't wait. Some things you don't wait on. And an 84-year-old man asking to see his life's work before he dies is one of them. Emily rode shotgun. The address Walter had given was an assisted living facility 2 hours west, and they drove into the setting sun with the ghost riding behind them. And this time it didn't feel like a ghost at all. It felt like they were carrying something home. But here is the thing about a story that 4 million people have watched. Everybody is watching. And Maya Whitmore was watching too. She had spent that entire day in her office with the blinds drawn, watching the view count climb, watching the comments roll in, watching the entire country turn her into a villain in the space of 12 hours. She had made phone calls, and the phone calls had frightened her more than the video, because the calls told her that reporters were already asking questions. And the questions were not about the car. The questions were about Walter Hayes. She had sent Gerald Pope to buy the mechanic's silence. The mechanic had thrown the money back in his face. And now she sat in her office and understood, with the cold clarity of a person watching a wall of water come toward them, that the thing she had spent her whole life keeping buried was about to come up into the light. And there was nothing money could do to stop it. Because it had never really been about the car. At 9:47 that night, Daniel's truck pulled into the parking lot of the Cedar Grove Assisted Living Facility. A young woman was waiting at the entrance. She came running across the lot before Daniel had even shut off the engine. "Are you Daniel?" she said. "I'm Grace. I'm Walter's granddaughter. He's... Oh my God, is that really it? Is that really the car?" She stopped, hand over her mouth, staring at the trailer. "He's been out of his mind all day. The nurses tried to make him rest, and he refused. He's been sitting by the window since 2 o'clock. Waiting." Her eyes filled. "I don't think you understand what this means to him. My whole life he's talked about that car. And my whole life I thought it was just a sad story, a thing he lost. I never once imagined I'd get to see it. "Where is he?" Daniel said. "I'll bring him out. He wants to see it outside. He wants to walk to it himself." She hesitated. "Mr. Brooks, there's something you should know before he comes out. About the car, about why it was lost." "He's going to tell you himself, but I want you to be ready. Because it's not the story anybody thinks it is." She glanced back at the building. "It's worse." And then she was gone. Daniel and Emily stood in the parking lot beside the Midnight Falcon in the dark and waited. It took 10 minutes, then the doors opened. Grace came out, pushing a wheelchair. And in the wheelchair sat a very old man, thin as a reed, wrapped in a cardigan too big for his shrunken frame. And even in the dim light of the parking lot, Daniel could see that the old man's eyes had found the car and would not leave it. "Stop," Walter Hayes said when they were still 20 feet away. "Grace, stop. I want to walk the rest." "Grandpa, I built that car on my own 2 legs," the old man said. "I'll come to it on my own 2 legs. Help me up." Grace looked at Daniel, helpless. Daniel came forward. Together, he and Grace lifted the old man out of the wheelchair. Walter Hayes stood swaying, one hand gripping Daniel's arm with a strength that surprised him. And he took 1 step, and another, and another. 20 feet across a parking lot, and it might as well have been 20 miles. Nobody said a word the entire way, and then Walter Hayes put his trembling hand on the hood of the Midnight Falcon, and he made a sound that Daniel would remember for the rest of his life. It wasn't a word. It was older than words. It was the sound a man makes when 60 years of grief and loss and buried love all come up out of him at once. His legs gave out. Daniel caught him, and the old man wept against the hood of the car he'd built as a young man. Wept like his heart was breaking and mending at the same time. "There you are," Walter whispered to the car. "There you are. Oh, I looked for you. I looked for you for so long." Emily was crying. Grace was crying. Daniel, holding the old man up, felt his own face wet and didn't care. "I'm sorry," Walter said when he could speak again. "An old man's foolishness. It's just, I never thought I'd—" He ran his hand along the metal. His fingers found the seams, the welds, the places he had shaped with his own hands 60 years before. And he laughed through his tears. "My work. That's my work. Right there. Feel that seam? I did that. Nobody could do that but me. 60 years. And it's still there. It's still—" He broke off. "How is it here? They told me it burned. They told me the whole shop burned, and the car with it. How is it here?" And Daniel gently told him. About the auction, about the corner, about the $500 price tag and the words, "Provenance unknown," about Maya Whitmore laughing on the stage, and the challenge and the linkage behind the seat with the name Hayes engraved on it. And as he talked, he watched the old man's face change, watched the joy drain out of it, and something older and darker come up in its place. "Whitmore," Walter said quietly. "It was in a Whitmore warehouse." "Yes, sir." "And she laughed at it, called it trash." "She did, before she knew what it was." Walter Hayes was quiet for a long moment, his hand still on the car. And when he spoke again, his voice had changed entirely. The grief was still there, but there was steel in it now. "Sit me down," he said. "Grace, bring the chair. There's something these people need to hear, and I've kept it to myself for 60 years, and I'm too old and too tired to keep it one day longer." They brought the wheelchair. They eased him into it, and under the parking lot lights, with his hand resting on the hood of the resurrected Falcon, Walter Hayes told them the truth. "I was 24 years old," he began. "Best years of my life. I could build anything, anything. And I built that car with a man named Buddy Callahan. He was the driver. Wild kid, no fear in him at all. And I was the brains. And together we were going to change the sport." His eyes shone. "And we did. That car set records nobody thought were possible. We were nobodies, 2 poor boys from nowhere. And we were beating men with 10 times our money." He paused. "And then a man came to see us, A businessman named Whitmore, Ambrose Whitmore, Maya's grandfather. Daniel felt something cold move through him. He wanted to buy the car? Walter said. The whole operation. Said he'd make us rich. Said he'd put his company's name on it, race it all over the country. And Buddy wanted to say yes. But I didn't trust him. Something about Ambrose Whitmore, the way he looked at the car like it was already his. Walter's jaw tightened. So I said no. I said the Falcon wasn't for sale, and I designed something new for it. That linkage you found behind the seat, a hand throttle. Buddy had hurt his leg, couldn't work the pedal right, so I built him a way to control the throttle by hand. It was going to let us keep racing, keep winning, keep beating Whitmore's cars. He stopped. And 2 weeks later there was a fire. The parking lot was silent. The shop burned to the ground, Walter said, in the middle of the night, and Buddy Callahan was inside. His voice cracked. They said it was an accident, bad wiring. They said the car burned with him. And I was young, and I was poor, and I was grieving, and I had no proof of anything. But I knew. In my bones, I knew. That fire wasn't an accident. Somebody wanted that car, and somebody wanted us gone. And when we said no, he stopped. He couldn't finish. Walter, Daniel said quietly, are you saying? I'm saying my partner died in that fire, Walter Hayes said. And I'm saying that 6 months later, Ambrose Whitmore's company suddenly had a whole new line of high-performance engines that looked an awful lot like mine. And I'm saying I spent the next 60 years too poor and too frightened and too broken to ever do a thing about it. His hand tightened on the hood of the car. And now here it is, the car that was supposed to have burned, the car that was supposed to be ash 60 years ago. And it's not ash. It's real, and it's got my throttle linkage still bolted in behind the seat. He looked up at Daniel, and his old eyes were burning. Son, do you understand what that means? It means the fire was a lie. It means somebody saved this car from that fire and hid it away for 60 years. Which means somebody knew the truth. Somebody's known the whole time. And Daniel Brooks, standing in a parking lot 2 hours from home, with a resurrected legend and a weeping old man and his own daughter's hand gripping his, understood at last exactly what he had walked into. It wasn't a story about a car. It was a story about a murder. And the woman who'd laughed at him from a stage, the woman whose family had built an empire, the woman who had tried so hard and so desperately to make this car disappear, for $500 she had known. Some part of her had known all along. That's why she was afraid. Not of losing a car, of the truth coming out about how her family's fortune had really begun. Daniel took out his phone. His hands were not quite steady. Mr. Hayes, he said, I need you to tell that whole story again, every word, and I need you to let me record it this time. He looked at the old man. Because you were too poor and too frightened to fight them 60 years ago, but you're not alone anymore. 4 million people watched me start your car this morning. His jaw set. Let's see how many of them want to hear what really happened to Buddy Callahan. Walter Hayes looked at him for a long moment, and then for the first time in 60 years, the old man smiled a smile with no grief in it at all. Turn it on, he said. Turn the camera on, son. I've been waiting 60 years to say this out loud. And Daniel pressed record. The recording went up the next morning, and if the first video had been a spark, this one was a wildfire. Daniel had spent half the night editing it, sitting at his kitchen table, Emily asleep on the couch. Cutting nothing, adding nothing, just letting Walter Hayes speak for himself in that thin, shaking, unbreakable voice. He'd titled it plainly, no clickbait, no shouting. The man who built the Midnight Falcon tells the truth. He posted it at 6 in the morning and went to bed. By 9, it had 2 million views. By noon, 8. And by the time the evening news picked it up, the whole country was saying 2 names that had been buried for 60 years. Walter Hayes and Buddy Callahan. Daniel's phone didn't stop ringing that day, but this time he answered it, because this time the calls weren't from lawyers, they were from reporters. Real ones. A journalist named Karen Diaz, who covered corporate accountability for one of the biggest papers in the country, called him at 2 in the afternoon. "Mr. Brooks," she said, "I've been chasing the Whitmore family for 6 years. Everybody in my business knows there's something rotten at the bottom of that fortune. But nobody's ever been able to touch it. The family's too careful, too lawyered up, too rich." She paused, and then a mechanic buys a $500 car, and the whole thing cracks open in a week. "I started an engine," Daniel said. "That's all I did." "No," Karen Diaz said. "You gave an old man his voice back after 60 years. That's what you did. And Mr. Brooks, I want to help him get justice. But I have to warn you, the moment we start pulling on this thread, the Whitmores are going to come after all of you. Hard. Are you ready for that?" Daniel looked across the shop at the Midnight Falcon and at Emily, who was doing her homework on an overturned crate beside it because she refused to let the car out of her sight. "Ma'am," he said, "they already sent a man with a briefcase to buy my silence, and I threw it back in his face. I've been ready since then." "Good," Karen Diaz said, "because they're not going to send briefcases anymore." She was right. The first thing they did was attack the car. At 4:30 that afternoon, Whitmore Automotive released a statement. Slick, lawyered, vicious. It claimed that the vehicle Daniel Brooks possessed was not in fact the Midnight Falcon at all. It claimed the whole thing was an elaborate hoax. That Daniel was a publicity-seeking con man who had planted the throttle linkage himself. That the so-called Walter Hayes was a confused elderly man being manipulated by an opportunist. It expressed deep concern for the exploitation of a vulnerable senior citizen. It threatened legal action. Daniel read the whole thing standing in his shop, and by the end his hands were shaking, but not with fear. "They just called Walter a liar," he said quietly. "An 84-year-old man who lost his best friend in a fire, and they just called him a confused old fool being used for money." He set the phone down very carefully because he wanted to throw it. "That's their mistake, Em. Right there. That's the mistake that's going to sink them." "Why?" Emily asked. "Because a man like Walter Hayes doesn't get to be 84 years old, carrying what he's carried, and let somebody call him a liar." Daniel picked the phone back up. "Get your shoes. We're going to see him." They found Walter in the common room of Cedar Grove. Someone had already shown him the statement. Daniel braced himself to find the old man crushed by it. He wasn't. Walter Hayes was sitting in his wheelchair by the window, and there was a light in his eyes that Daniel hadn't seen before. A hard, bright, angry light. When he saw Daniel, he beckoned him over with a trembling hand. "They called me a liar," Walter said. "I know." "I'm sorry, Don't be sorry." The old man's voice was fierce. "Don't you dare be sorry. Do you know what this means? For 60 years I said nothing because I had no proof and no power, and no one would ever have believed a poor mechanic over the Whitmore family. And now they've stood up in front of the whole country and called me a liar, which means they have to prove it, which means it's finally a fight I can be in." He was almost laughing. "They should have stayed quiet, son. They should have let an old man mumble to himself in a nursing home. Instead, they picked the fight. And I have been waiting 60 years for somebody with the Whitmore name to pick this fight." "Mr. Hayes," Daniel said slowly, "do you have any proof? Anything at all? Because I've got to be honest with you right now. It's your word against theirs. And they've got 100 lawyers, and I have proof," Walter Hayes said. Daniel went very still. "You have what kind of proof?" Walter looked out the window for a long moment. "When the shop burned, everyone believed Buddy died in the fire, and the car with him. But I told you somebody saved the car. Somebody pulled it out of that fire and hid it for 60 years. And I never knew who. For 60 years, I never knew who saved my car or why." He turned back to Daniel. "But whoever did it, they didn't just save the car. They saved something else, something that was in the car." "What was in the car?" "I don't know," Walter admitted, "but I know Buddy, and I know that in those last weeks, Buddy was scared." Ambrose Whitmore had come back a second time, angrier. And Buddy told me he'd started keeping notes, writing things down, dates, conversations, threats. He said if anything ever happened to him, he wanted there to be a record. The old man's voice dropped. And he said he'd hidden it somewhere nobody would ever think to look. Somewhere only a mechanic would find. He looked at Daniel. Son, you've had that car for 2 days. You're a mechanic. You've had your hands all through it. Tell me, have you found anything strange? Anything that doesn't belong? Anything hidden? And Daniel Brooks felt the whole world go quiet around him, because he had. There's a compartment, he said slowly, behind the firewall. I found it yesterday when I was cleaning the engine bay. I thought it was just a factory void. Empty space. He stood up. It's sealed, rusted shut. I figured it was nothing. I never opened it. Walter Hayes reached out and gripped Daniel's hand with both of his, and his grip was like iron. Open it, he whispered. Daniel, go home and open it. They drove back to the shop that night faster than Daniel had ever driven with Emily in the truck. And neither of them spoke because there was nothing to say that mattered as much as what might be waiting behind a rusted panel in a 60-year-old car. Daniel didn't even turn on all the shop lights. He went straight to the Falcon, dropped to his knees beside the engine bay, and found the compartment he'd dismissed the day before. It was small, no bigger than a paperback book, tucked up behind the firewall where you'd never see it unless you were lying underneath with a flashlight, which Daniel had been. Hold the light, Em. Emily held the light. Daniel worked the panel with a flat blade and a hammer. Gentle taps, working 60 years of rust loose without destroying whatever might be inside. It took 10 minutes that felt like 10 hours, and then, with a screech of old metal, the panel came free. Inside was a small tin box wrapped in what had once been oilcloth and was now brittle, rotted fabric. Daniel lifted it out with hands that would not stop shaking. What is it? Emily breathed. I don't know. He opened it. Inside was a stack of papers, yellowed and fragile, folded tight, kept dry for 60 years by the oilcloth and the sealed compartment. And on top of the papers was a small photograph. 2 young men grinning, standing beside a brand new red Dragster, one of them holding a trophy over his head. And Daniel didn't need to be told which one was Buddy Callahan and which was Walter Hayes. Under the photograph were the notes, Buddy Callahan's handwriting, 60 years old. Dated, detailed, desperate. Daniel read the first page by flashlight and felt the hair stand up on his arms, because it was all there. The dates Ambrose Whitmore had come to the shop, what he'd offered, what he'd threatened when they said no. The exact words, "You'll regret this, both of you. You have no idea who you're dealing with." A list of the engine designs Whitmore had wanted. The same designs that had shown up in Whitmore Automotive's product line 6 months after the fire. And on the last page, in handwriting that had gone shaky, dated 3 days before the fire, a single line that made Daniel's blood run cold. If the shop burns, it wasn't an accident. Ambrose did it. Whoever finds this, please tell the truth for us. We were just 2 boys who built something beautiful and wouldn't sell it. Daniel sat back on the concrete floor of his shop, holding 60 years of buried truth in his hands. And for a moment, he couldn't breathe. Dad! Emily's voice was frightened. Dad, what does it say? It says, Daniel managed, that Buddy Callahan knew he was going to be killed. And he left us a message. He looked up at his daughter. His eyes were wet. And it says we're going to keep the promise he asked us to keep 60 years ago, before either of us was even born. He wrapped the papers carefully back in the oilcloth. We're going to tell the truth for them. Telling the truth, it turned out, was going to be a war, because the Whitmores were not going to sit still. The next morning, a county inspector showed up at the shop, said there'd been a complaint, said he needed to check Daniel's business permits as zoning his equipment. He spent 3 hours going through everything with a fine-tooth comb. He found nothing, because Daniel Brooks did everything by the book. But the message was clear. That afternoon, the bank called. The bank that held his mortgage. Suddenly, there was a problem with his account, a review being conducted. Would Mr. Brooks come in to discuss the status of his loan? And that evening, Emily came home from a friend's house. Pale, quiet. When Daniel asked her what was wrong, she said a man in a car had been parked outside the friend's house, and he'd watched her the whole time. When she came out, he'd driven away slow. That was the one that broke something in Daniel, not the inspector, not the bank, not the threats to him, but a man in a car watching his 9-year-old daughter. He called Karen Diaz that night. His voice was shaking. He told her everything. There was a silence on the line. Then the reporter said something Daniel would never forget. "Mr. Brooks, they're trying to scare you into quiet. And I need you to understand something about people like the Whitmores. The scare tactics, the inspector, the bank, the man watching your daughter, that's what they do when they're losing. That's not the behavior of people who are winning. That's the behavior of people who are terrified." She paused. "You found something, didn't you, in the car? That's why they're panicking. What did you find?" And Daniel told her about the tin box. The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long he thought the call had dropped. "Mr. Brooks," Karen Diaz finally said, and her voice had changed completely. "Do not let that box out of your sight. Do not tell another living soul it exists. Make copies tonight. Scan every page and send them to me. Send them to 3 other people you trust, and put the original somewhere safe." She was talking fast now. "Because what you just described isn't a story anymore. It's evidence in a murder. And the moment the Whitmores find out it exists, they're going to do anything to make it disappear, including making you disappear." Daniel looked across his kitchen at Emily asleep again on the couch. "Then let's not give them the chance," he said. "Ms. Diaz, how fast can you get here?" She was there by morning, and what happened next moved faster than Daniel could have imagined. Karen Diaz didn't work slow. She'd waited 6 years for a crack in the Whitmore wall, and now that she had one, she drove a wedge into it with everything she had. She authenticated the notes. The paper, the ink, the handwriting, all confirmed to be 60 years old by an expert she trusted. She tracked down a retired fire investigator who'd worked the original shop fire, and who, it turned out, had never believed the accident ruling, and had been quietly sick about it for 6 decades. And she found in a box of old county records the original incident report, a report that had listed the fire as suspicious before someone higher up had reclassified it as accidental. And she found the name of the man who'd reclassified it. He was, at the time, a young official who owed a great deal of money. 6 months after he changed that report, that debt was mysteriously paid in full by a company called Whitmore Automotive. When Karen Diaz laid it all out on Daniel's kitchen table, Daniel looked at 60 years of buried murder spread across the same table where his daughter ate her breakfast. And he understood that he was holding something that could bring down one of the most powerful families in America. And he understood something else, too, that Maya Whitmore had known. Maybe not all of it. Maybe she'd been a child when it happened, or not even born. But somewhere along the way, she had learned the truth about how her family's fortune began, and she had chosen to keep it buried. And when that dusty red car turned up in her warehouse, she had tried to make it vanish for $500 rather than let the past come to light. She was not the architect of the crime, but she had become its final guardian. And that Daniel thought was almost worse, because Ambrose Whitmore had been a monster. And monsters do monstrous things. But Maya had a choice. She'd stood on that stage and laughed at Walter Hayes's life's work. Called it trash. Tried to erase 2 young men and their beautiful machine. Not because she had to, but because it was easier than facing what her family was. His phone rang. He looked at the screen, a number he now knew by heart. It was her. Daniel looked at Karen Diaz. She nodded slowly. "Answer it," she said, "but be careful." Daniel answered, "Mr. Brooks." Maya Whitmore's voice was different than he'd ever heard it. The steel was gone. The contempt was gone. What was left sounded almost human and almost afraid. "I think you and I need to talk. In person. Alone." "I don't think we've got anything to say to each other, Ms. Whitmore. Not anymore." You called an 84-year-old man a liar. You sent a man to watch my daughter. I didn't, her voice broke. The man watching your daughter, I didn't order that. I swear to you I didn't. There are people in my company, people who work for my father who do things I don't. She stopped, composed herself. Mr. Brooks, please. I'm asking you for one conversation, because I think you've figured out most of it by now. And there's a part you haven't figured out, a part nobody knows. And before this all comes apart, and it is going to come apart, there's something I need to tell you. Something I've never told anyone. Daniel looked at the tin box on his table, at the photograph of two grinning young men, at his sleeping daughter. Where? He said. The warehouse, where it started. Tomorrow morning. Come alone. A pause. Please. I'm not trying to trap you. I'm trying to... Her voice cracked one more time. I'm trying to do the first honest thing I've done in 20 years. The line went dead. Daniel set the phone down slowly. Karen Diaz was watching him. You're not going alone, she said. Absolutely not. But Daniel was looking at the photograph of Buddy Callahan. 24 years old, grinning, holding a trophy over his head. 3 months before he burned to death in a shop fire that a rich man ordered. Maybe it's a trap, Daniel said quietly. Maybe. He picked up the tin box and held it against his chest. But she said there's a part nobody knows, and I've come too far to stop before I know the whole truth. He looked at Karen. Buddy Callahan wrote Tell the Truth for us, not half of it, all of it. And if Maya Whitmore's got the last piece, then I'm going to that warehouse tomorrow. And I'm going to hear it. Daniel Brooks drove to the warehouse the next morning with the tin box locked in a safe deposit box at his bank. Copies of every page sitting in the inboxes of 4 different people. He drove alone, exactly the way she'd asked. Because he'd decided that whatever Maya Whitmore had to tell him, he wanted to hear it without an audience. But he wasn't a fool. Karen Diaz was parked 2 blocks away with her phone recording, and if Daniel didn't call her every 15 minutes, she was walking straight into that building with the police behind her. The warehouse was empty. No crowd, no stage, no glittering machines, just the vast concrete space where 200 people had laughed at him a week before. And standing in the middle of it alone was Maya Whitmore. She looked smaller than she had on that stage, older. She'd stopped wearing the armor, whatever it was made of, and what was left was just a tired woman in her 50s, standing in an empty building. You came alone, she said. You asked me to. I half expected you not to. A thin, exhausted smile. I wouldn't have in your place. Daniel stopped 10 feet from her and kept his hands loose at his sides. You said there's a part nobody knows. So say it. Maya was quiet for a long moment, and then she said something Daniel had not expected. My grandfather didn't order that fire. Daniel's jaw tightened. Miss Whitmore, I've got Buddy Callahan's own handwriting saying, I know what you have. She held up a hand. I know exactly what you have, because I've spent 3 sleepless nights imagining it. Let me finish, please. I've been carrying this for 20 years, and I only get to set it down once. She took a breath. My grandfather didn't order that fire. My grandfather set it with his own hands. There's a difference. And the difference is the thing I have to tell you. The warehouse went very quiet. I was there, Maya said, that night. He went to the shop himself because he didn't trust anyone else to do it. He thought the place would be empty. He didn't know Buddy Callahan was inside. Buddy had been sleeping in the shop those last weeks. He was scared. He wouldn't leave the car alone. He thought if he stayed close, nothing could happen to it. Her voice was flat, drained. My grandfather set the fire to destroy the car and force them to sell. He never meant to kill anyone. And when he realized Buddy was inside, when he heard him, she stopped. He ran. Daniel finished quietly. Maya's eyes were wet. He left a 24-year-old boy to burn, and he ran. And he spent the rest of his life pretending it was an accident that had nothing to do with him. And it worked. It worked for 60 years because he was rich and Buddy Callahan was poor and Walter Hayes was poor, and the world doesn't look very hard at what happens to poor men when a rich man wants it forgotten. "How do you know all this?" Daniel said. "If it was buried so deep, if it worked so well, how do you know?" "Because he told me." Daniel went still. "On his deathbed, 20 years ago. I was 32 years old, and he was dying, and he called me to his bedside, and he told me everything. Because I was the one he'd chosen to take over the company, and he said," her voice broke completely now, "he said, a leader has to know where the money came from. He said every great fortune has a body under it, and mine had this one, and I needed to know so I could protect it. Protect the lie." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. Furious, ashamed. "My grandfather confessed a murder to me the way another man might hand down a pocket watch, like it was an heirloom, like it was something to be proud of that he'd gotten away with it." Daniel felt sick. "And you kept it." "I kept it." She looked at him, and there was no defense in it, no excuse, just the raw, ugly truth. "For 20 years I kept it. I told myself it was ancient history. I told myself the men were dead and gone, and nothing could be done, and dragging it up would only destroy thousands of jobs and my family's name and everything my grandfather built. I told myself every comforting thing a person tells themselves to keep from doing the hard, right thing." Her voice dropped. "And then a car came into my warehouse, a dusty red car, and my engineers went white as sheets because they'd found a throttle linkage behind the seat with the name Hayes on it. And they came to me and they said, 'Miss Whitmore, we think this is the Midnight Falcon.' And you said, 'Make it disappear.'" I said, "Make it disappear." She laughed, a horrible, broken sound. $500. Provenance unknown. Get it out of the building. Sell it to anyone. Just make it gone before anyone asks questions. She shook her head. "And then I did something even worse. I decided to have a little fun with it first. I put it in the auction down with the junk lots, and I stood on that stage and I laughed at it because I thought if I mocked it, if I made it a joke in front of 200 people, then nobody would ever take it seriously. Nobody would ever look twice at the worthless old car the CEO laughed at." Her eyes found Daniel's. "And then a mechanic in work boots stood up in the back of my room and reached behind the seat. And I watched 60 years of my family's lies start to come apart in the hands of a man I'd been laughing at 10 seconds before." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "Why are you telling me this?" Daniel said finally. "You've got 100 lawyers. You could fight this for years. You could bury Walter all over again. Why are you standing in an empty warehouse confessing your family's murder to a mechanic?" And Maya Whitmore gave him the truest answer he'd ever heard from anyone. "Because I'm tired," she said simply. "Because I have carried this thing for 20 years, and it has eaten me alive from the inside. And I stood on that stage and laughed, and I heard my grandfather's voice coming out of my own mouth. And I realized I had become exactly what he was, a person who steps over a body to protect a fortune." Her voice steadied. "And when you started that engine, when I heard that car come back to life after everyone swore it was dead, something in me came back to life too. The part that used to know right from wrong before I let my grandfather teach me otherwise." She looked at him. "You didn't just resurrect a car, Mr. Brooks. You resurrected the truth, and I am done. I am so done standing on top of it, holding it down." Daniel studied her for a long moment, and what he saw was real. Whatever else Maya Whitmore was, whatever she'd done, the woman standing in front of him now was not lying. "There's still a man watching my daughter," he said quietly. "Not anymore." Maya reached into her coat and pulled out a folder. Thick, official-looking. She held it out. "I fired the head of my family's private security this morning. Personally. He was a holdover from my father's era, the kind of man who does the ugly things and doesn't ask questions. He's the one who sent someone to watch your daughter. He did it without my knowledge, and when I found out," her jaw tightened. "This folder, it's everything. Internal documents, my grandfather's private papers. Financial records showing the payment to the county official who reclassified the fire. Everything my family has that corroborates what you already found. She pushed it toward him. Karen Diaz has been chasing this for 6 years. Give it to her. It's the last piece. With this and Buddy's notes, there's no lawyer alive who can bury it again. Daniel didn't take the folder right away. You understand what this does to you? He said. You hand me this, it doesn't just clear Walter's name. It destroys your company, your family's name. Everything. You could go to prison. Not for the murder, you didn't do that, but for 20 years of covering it up. Obstruction, concealment. You know that. I know that. Then why? Maya Whitmore looked down at the folder in her hand, and when she looked back up, there were tears running freely down her face. Because Buddy Callahan was 24 years old, she said, and he built something beautiful, and he wouldn't sell it, and my grandfather burned him alive for it. And for 60 years the world remembered the Whitmore name and forgot his. And I will not. I cannot be the last link in that chain. Her voice broke. Whatever it costs me. Take the folder, Mr. Brooks, please. Let me do one honest thing before the end. And Daniel Brooks took the folder. What happened after that happened fast, the way these things do once the dam finally breaks. Karen Diaz's story ran 3 days later. And it did not run quietly. It ran on the front page. With Buddy Callahan's own handwriting reproduced across 2 full pages, with the payment records, the fire report, the reclassification, with Walter Hayes' face, and the whole 60-year architecture of the lie laid bare. And because Maya Whitmore had handed over her family's own documents, there was no crack for the lawyers to slip through, no hoax to allege, no confused old man to blame. It was simply, undeniably true. The country did not forgive it. Whitmore automotive stock collapsed. The board forced Maya out within a week. There were investigations, state, then federal. And though Ambrose Whitmore had been dead for 20 years and could never be tried for what he'd done, the machinery of accountability ground forward anyway. Because sometimes the truth coming out is its own kind of justice, even when a courtroom can't finish the job. Maya Whitmore did not fight any of it. She pleaded guilty to the charges related to her concealment, and she stood in a courtroom and said in a clear voice that she had known the truth for 20 years and had chosen to hide it, and that she was ashamed, and that no sentence the court gave her would be as heavy as the one she'd been carrying already. She served 18 months. She never once claimed she didn't deserve it. But the part of the story the country remembered, the part that 4 million views became 40 million, that turned a Texas mechanic into a name people knew, was not the fall of the Whitmores. It was Walter Hayes. Because 6 weeks after the story broke at a small ceremony that Daniel organized himself, Walter Hayes sat in his wheelchair in front of the resurrected Midnight Falcon and watched as a National Racing Museum unveiled a permanent exhibit. And the exhibit was not called the Whitmore Collection. And it was not called the Midnight Falcon Display. It was called in large letters that Walter had chosen himself, Callahan and Hayes, the boys who wouldn't sell. And beside the car, in a glass case, they placed Buddy Callahan's notes, the real ones, so that every person who ever came to see that beautiful machine would also read the words of the young man who died protecting it, and would know his name. Walter Hayes lived to see it. That was the thing Daniel was most grateful for in the end. The old man lived 11 more months after the exhibit opened, and Daniel brought him to the museum a dozen times, and every single time Walter would put his trembling hand on the hood of the car and go quiet. And Daniel learned not to fill that quiet, because it was a conversation between an old man and his dead friend. And it wasn't Daniel's to interrupt. The last time Daniel brought him Walter was very weak. He held Daniel's hand for a long time in the quiet of the closed museum. Just the two of them, and Emily and the car. "You know what I keep thinking about," Walter said. "What's that?" "That she could have just crushed it." The old man's voice was barely a whisper now. "Maya, when her engineers found it, she could have had it crushed into a cube of scrap and no one would ever have known. It would have been the smart thing, the safe thing." He turned his head to look at Daniel. "But she didn't. Some part of her wanted it found. Some part of her put it in that auction knowing, hoping, maybe, that somebody would look close, that somebody would see. His thin fingers tightened. People are strange, son. Even the ones who do terrible things. There's usually a piece of them buried way down deep that's praying somebody will come along and make them stop. Daniel thought about that for a long time. You forgive her? He asked. Walter Hayes closed his eyes. I forgive the girl who handed you that folder, he said. The one who did the hard right thing when the easy wrong thing was sitting right there. That girl, I forgive. His mouth tightened. The one who laughed at my car on that stage, her I'm still working on. I'm 85, I've got time. And he smiled, and it was a real smile. And Daniel laughed, and even Emily laughed, and for a moment the whole terrible weight of it lifted. And there was just an old man, and a father, and a little girl, and a beautiful red car in a quiet room. Walter Hayes died that spring, peacefully in his sleep, with a photograph of two grinning young men and a brand new dragster on the table beside his bed. At his funeral, Daniel Brooks gave the eulogy, and he didn't talk about the lawsuit or the Whitmores at all. He talked about a young man who could build anything, and a young man's promise, and a name that would now be remembered as long as that car existed, which was to say, forever. When it was over, Grace Walter's granddaughter pressed something into Daniel's hand. It was the old photograph, Buddy and Walter. 24 years old, grinning, invincible, alive. He wanted you to have it, she said. He said you were the one who finally kept the promise. He said you told the truth for them. Daniel Brooks kept that photograph for the rest of his life. His shop grew after all of it, not because he sought it out, but because people wanted their engines fixed by the man who'd started the Midnight Falcon. And Daniel took the extra money and did something with it. He started training young mechanics, kids from rough neighborhoods, kids nobody else would give a chance to. The kind of kids everybody looked at and saw trash instead of looking close enough to see gold. He taught them the trade. And he taught them something else too. Something he'd say to every single one of them on their first day. Anybody can look at a thing and decide it's worthless, he'd tell them. That's the easiest thing in the world. It takes a real craftsman to look close enough to see what something actually is. He'd pause. And people are the same as engines, every one of you. Same exact thing. Most folks glance at a person, slap a price tag on them, and move along. Don't not you ever be that kind of person. You look close. You always look close. Because the most valuable thing in the world is almost always sitting in the corner, covered in dust, with everybody walking right past it. Emily grew up to be a mechanic in the end, just like she'd always said. She runs the shop now alongside her father. And there's a photograph on the wall of the office, two young men grinning, standing beside a red dragster, holding a trophy to the sky. Sometimes, when a customer asks about it, Emily tells them the story. The whole story, the auction and the challenge and the $500 car everyone laughed at, and the hand that reached behind the seat. And the truth that waited 60 years in a rusted tin box for somebody to care enough to find it. And she always ends it the same way, the way her father taught her. A billionaire stood on a stage and laughed at a broken old car, she'll say. She was so sure she knew what it was worth. $500. Trash. Nothing. And then Emily will smile, the same slow smile her father always had. But she was wrong about the car. She pauses, and she was wrong about the man. Another pause. Because the thing everybody underestimates, the thing sitting quiet in the corner while the whole world walks past it, that's almost always the thing that turns out to matter most. Daniel Brooks never became a rich man. He never wanted to. But he died an old man in a house full of family, respected by everyone who knew him, having given 100 forgotten kids a trade and a chance and a reason to hold their heads up. And the Midnight Falcon still sits in that museum, engine intact, frame untouched, every scratch and dent exactly where 60 years of history left them. Thousands of people walk past it every year, And beside it, in a small glass case, sits an old auction receipt for $500. And the notes of a young man who wouldn't sell, and the names of two boys who built something beautiful and refused to let the world forget it. They were not forgotten, not anymore, because one man looked close enough to see the truth that everyone else walked right past, and he had the courage to reach behind the seat.